wants me to go the other side? Okay. Okay, we have had the anthem, so we can move on now with the formalities. I almost said, Mr. Chairman, but then I had to remind myself that I am the chairman. So let me say, first of all, that we have persons we have to address this. We don't say knights anymore, but let me say knights and ladies and gentlemen. This is the first in a series of meetings that are intended to be held by the Parliamentary Reform Commission, chaired by Sir Richard Cheltenham. So let me first of all say, Sir Richard, Honorable Liz Thompson, other distinguished members of the Commission, whose names I will call in a minute, Honorable Robert Bobby Morris, Dr. George Bell, and Mr. Peter Wickham, other very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and if I have not recognized your title, please forgive me for doing so. This commission that I just mentioned has been recently appointed and has been sworn in by the President of the country sometime during the month of May, and in one case after May, in the case of the Clerk of Parliament. And those people are made up of Mr. Chairman, yourself, Richard Cheltenham. Then there was a guy called Leroy Trotman somewhere. In addition to this, we have Ambassador Liz Thompson, Mr. Corey Beckles, who in his own right is an attorney at law, Dr. William Chandler, Jr., they tell me, although he doesn't look so junior to me. Doctor, and this is a doctor of medicine this time, Dr. Richard Ishmael, Miss Maxine McLean, and of course the Clerk of Parliament. These are the members of the Commission, and I welcome them and ask you to receive them as the commissioners appointed in this instance. So if you would just acknowledge their presence. For today's session involving the public, we thought that we would have a very no-nonsense group of persons. If you could say one thing for them besides their intellectual capabilities, it is that they speak their minds without fear or favor, and that they may be relied upon to be people who will address the subject that they're called upon to address. And therefore, in our view, there were a very good group of three persons whom we would use and ask to give a jump off, a taken off for the session. Today's session, this evening's session, is the first in a series that will go for about 2 months. And the very next one is at Foundation School. I go back to when I was there, but it's not Boys Foundation again, it's Foundation School.
Boys and
And
girls.
that will be next Thursday. Yes, Chairman, that too. And we need to recognize another distinguished chairman of a commission,
Constitutional.
Christopher Blackman, who has just joined us. Now, today's session is intended, first of all, to make the public aware of what are the terms of reference that are set for this commission. And we are going to be asking the chairman, as the best person, to address that subject. But once the chairman has dealt with that, then we are going to go to those three persons I was talking about. I'm not going to be saying much about them because we want to be hearing from them, and we want to leave some time for questions that you might be able to put about how we go about looking at this issue in the broadest possible way, and we have only limited time. On the clock it says 9, but sometimes I don't see so well. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Richard Cheltenham, who is going to address you at this time, giving you the terms of reference for this Parliamentary Reform Commission. Dr. Cheltenham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fellow members of the Parliamentary Reform Commission, distinguished ladies and gentlemen all. The chairman of the Constitutional Reform Commission, Christopher Blackman, has just joined us, and I thought I'm delighted to be recognizing him. I'm sure it is working. Yes. I began by saying that I'm delighted to see you here tonight. I think that there are now about 50 or so of us, and I'm told that there is a growing amount of people who are following us online. This is the first public session, as was told to you by Sir Roy Trotman, as the first of many sessions which we are proposing to hold across the country. I want at the outset to acknowledge the presence of my fellow commissioners. We have, of course, our moderator, Sir Roy Trotman, Deputy Chairman, and an old foundation boy like myself. We have to Ambassador Liz Thompson. We have Ms. Maxine McLean, Dr. Richard Ismail, Dr. William Chandler Jr., and Mr. Corey Beckles. The commission which I have the honor to chair was established on the 8th of May this year, and we are due to present a report on our findings and recommendations to the President by the 8th of November this year. Not a long time at all in which to do our work. Generally speaking, we are to look at our current parliamentary system and see what reforms need to be implemented in the structure and functioning of Parliament. As part of our responsibility, we are mandated to consult widely with the public and to hear the opinions and suggestions of all Barbadians. There is a place for every fellow Barbadian in this process. In fact, we have issued a public notice inviting written submissions from those who do not want to appear in person. And in relation to those written submissions, we ask only that you keep your submissions to 5 to 7 pages in length. I want to assure you that every viewpoint and school of thought will be considered, and we invite you all to speak up and speak out, as it were. In reaching out, I want to emphasize that we wish to be as inclusive as possible, and we intend to consult with our diaspora. I think a lot of Barbadians will be concerned to know why we are doing this parliamentary reform exercise at this time. Some of us will remember that when Barbados became independent in 1966, November, a reasonably long time ago, in fact, I myself was still a student in Canada at McGill University. But it was a proud moment in our history and development. According to Prime Minister Barra, we were determined not to be caught loitering on colonial premises after closing time. And he thought that with the movement towards independence in the British colonial world, that many other countries had gone ahead and become independent. And he said we were determined, we in Barbados, not to be caught loitering on the colonial premises after closing time. But as proud as we were in that moment, there were still some colonial linkages which persisted. Notwithstanding our independence, we retained a monarchy. So while Barbados severed its ties with the British government, we retained the British sovereign as our head of state. That explained why our governors general were appointed in Barbados by the Queen as her local representative, though always, I must add, on the advice of the local government. But that is not the only colonial linkage which persisted. Our ambassadors had to be approved by the Queen. I should add that there is no case on record where she would object it, but it did delay the process, and sometimes the appointment could take 3 months just because the names had to pass through the palace. On top of that, certain office holders, including judges and parliamentarians, had to take an oath of allegiance, not to our country, Barbados, but to the Crown. In terms of Parliament, previously when the Governor-General assented to legislation passed by both houses, he or she did so in their capacity as the Queen's representative. Now it is done on behalf of our citizens. Now with our Republican status, it is done on behalf of our citizens. Essentially, a republic is a country without a monarch. If you had to be asked for a simple definition of a republic, it is a country without a monarch. And the step we took in November 2021 was to change our system of government from a constitutional monarchy to a parliamentary republic. It was the final step in the decolonization process and in asserting our nationhood. Our new Republican status presents us with the perfect moment in our development to review what has gone on before in terms of our Parliament and decide what reforms need to be implemented now to make our Parliament more consistent with our new Republican status. We have retained the Westminster style of government with 2 houses of Parliament, House of Assembly and a Senate, and we have also retained the ceremonial head of state. We have also, I should add, retained the first past the post electoral system, where the political party which receives the most vote wins. In examining our system, some voices are calling for proportional representation especially in light of the results of the 2018 and 2022 general elections, where there was no parliamentary opposition. Others are suggesting that we adopt Sir Henry Ford's 1998 recommendation, and that was the commission which he headed, to give the opposition at all times 6 Senate seats. He had recommended that in his 1998 report. Is that the answer to the recent results at the polls? That's an important question which we have to ask ourselves. Another issue resulting from our terms of reference is how best to make our Parliament more inclusive. Women, for example, have traditionally been underrepresented in Parliament, especially in the House of Assembly. And we have to consider how best more women can be encouraged to participate in politics. One view is to set gender quotas. Some countries have used that and use it quite successfully. Another view is to encourage the political parties to recruit more women as candidates and offer them support in the election. Some studies have suggested that women are not generally given safe seats by the political parties or given the same support as men. The question is, how can that be addressed? If indeed that obtains here in Barbados, we have far more men traditionally entering Parliament than women, but insofar as we've had women and still have, I don't know that they are given any less support. I see Liz Thompson is smiling as though she will have something to say about that, and I welcome that. In terms of representativeness as well, we have also to look at the range of interests represented by independent senators in the upper house. At present, the President may appoint persons who represent religious, economic, or social interests. The question we have to ask is, should those categories be widened to include, for example, the elderly, youth, the disabled, the LGBT community, small business, while retaining the 3 interests which are represented today: religious, economic, or social interests. One of the big issues which we as a Commission will have to look at will be ethics, transparency, and accountability. Last night, the Integrity and Public Life Bill was passed in the Senate, and it will be a big step towards addressing an issue which the public is rightly concerned about. But we must also look at a code of ethics for parliamentarians generally, as well as the functioning of the Public Accounts Committee. That committee has an important supervisory role with respect to public spending. But the leader of the opposition is the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. And because there is no leader of the opposition at present in the House of Assembly, there is no chairman. And so the committee is not able to meet. It follows that the committee has to be seriously refashioned. And one question which arises is whether non-parliamentarians should or should not be on the committee. These are just a few of the many issues on which the Commission will focus. But we truly want to hear the views of fellow Barbadians about the many issues which the Commission should address in the context of our terms of reference. The Barbados Parliament has a long and proud history. We have always been independent-minded here in this small country, And even though we were a colony, we have one of the oldest parliaments in the Commonwealth: England, Bermuda, Barbados. They are the three of the oldest parliaments in the Commonwealth. The responsibility of the Commission is to ensure that this institution, Parliament, which has served us well and which has been the springboard for so much progress in our post-independence period, remains fit for the purpose as we enter our new modern Republican era. In conclusion, I am looking forward to hearing from my fellow patrician here tonight, and by that I mean those born and raised up in St. Patrick's. I'm referring to my old friend Robert Bobby Pickers Morris, who will remind us of the highlights of our Parliament that goes back to 1639. I'm also as anxious as you are to hear from Dr. George Bell, who a few years ago, just a few years, returned from the Department of Government, University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, and also to hearing from Mr. Peter Wickham, well-known political scientist and election forecaster. And so, having said as much as I have, it only remains for me to thank you for listening to us tonight and for the support, I'm sure, which you fellow Barbadians will give the Commission.
Thank you very much, Sir Richard. As you will note, Sir Richard has sought to lay out for you aspects of the terms of reference that have been placed on the shoulders of this commission. And I think that you have heard him say, though not in these words, that what the commission is hoping is that you would be able, by the frankness of your discourse, to feed enough information to this body of persons that we might be able properly to reflect your thinking and make the recommendations which we think are due and owing from your deliberations. So you are charged to reflect on who we are as a nation, what we have done or what we are doing, how we are doing it, where we might make that better, and why we might want to change in the first place. And to be able to look at those questions and to help us in that exercise, we have chosen three persons who, as I told you earlier, if you say nothing else for them, you have to designate them, refer to them, speak to them as people who will speak their minds and speak it frankly at all times. And they have chosen a form. I don't know if they had a choice in choosing the form, because the order of speaking was not even given to the chair. He was told that as chair, this is the order he would have. That's good democracy. So, Dr. George Bell, you have been asked to be first man up. And George is speaking on a very interesting subject: public perception of the utility of parliamentary reform. I'm going to repeat that again. And that for you is going to be having you consider that frank speaking has to be the order of the day as we attempt to explore what we have and how we need to change what we have. Public perception of the utility of parliamentary reform. Dr. George Bell.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thanks to the Commission for inviting me to participate in this public education session. I think these sessions are always very important for the Barbadian populace. When I looked at the sheet, I saw that I was batting last, but I don't mind batting first. So it's good. And welcome to everybody, my friend Peter and my friend Richard, and my friend Robert, and all the other friends, and and also the. Okay, you bring it closer to me. Yeah, and to the commissioners themselves, and to any members of the Constitutional Commission, the chair is here. My greetings to you, and to the audience. Glad to see all you. This is the first time that I've been in a public session for 4 years. Although y'all may not think so, you might see me on TV all the time. But as I got older and towards my retirement, my knees decided to retire too. So I had to have surgery on both knees, and therefore I had to learn to walk again altogether. So that's why you saw me balancing coming here. Much better than a few years ago. And I hope to be standing up on these days and running and all that kind of thing.
Large ambition.
A great ambition. Not to worry, I am okay. You know, this thing keep coming on. Okay. Yeah. The way that I felt I could deal with this issue tonight was to identify first a kind of context in which this discussion is going to take place. And I use a number of headings for that context. I want to look at the issue in relation to minimalism in terms of constitutional reform and maximalism in terms of constitutional reform. I want to look at it in relation to what happens in a situation where constitutional conditions have not reached what you could call ground zero, as everything mash up. And I want to look at it in relation to liberty, especially the liberty as defined by Alexis de Tocqueville, and his famous political characterization of the tyranny of the majority, which he used having looked at the democracy of the United States of America. And then I'm going to look at some relevant issues of reform that we might want to reform. Obviously not all of them. The chairman covered a whole lot of things there. I just think that I would raise issues for discussion that might be more prominent. I will touch on the proportional versus first past the post issue, because that has implications for the parliamentary form and the constitutional governance form. Some reference to our modern contemporary technology which could be used for political purposes, such as what we see during crop over, when people are voting for various levels of calypso champion, that you could just touch a button and tell people who you prefer. And of course, people can abuse that because, you can get your family together and do it as well. So it would have no legitimacy. It would be to inform the legislators of what is going on in the community in terms of things. You can get that from the calling program too, as Peter would know. People call in, don't mean that it's knowledge, it's information. Okay? Matter is the opposite of knowledge. But nonetheless, you want to hear them, because you must hear both all kinds. There's a whole view from antiquity that says there's wisdom at the well. That was an elitist view, but it was saying that you could go to the well and see somebody drawing water, a poor maiden, as they would have said at that time. And you must still listen to her, because something that comes out of her mouth might actually be wise. And you make use of that. Don't go there and think that because she pulling something from the well, that she can't say something wise. So we could still use the data that people get on the computers or phones or whatever and say, well, I like what you're all saying, they're Brahm. I hate it. And the parliamentarians say, wow, okay? And let's shift the argument a little bit, or they can just ignore it because the people will have no power. The power in a democracy must always be the ones that face the polls and face the electorate and are voted in. That is why even when you're going to lunch in Parliament, you say, those in favor of going to lunch, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The guy even go to lunch without voting. And that is because we are in a democracy. Okay? I said, well, I want to get the toilet. I said, oh, too. They'll vote on that too. But anyway, so, all right, right. I just said that to be crass. Okay? Make people laugh and all that kind of thing, you know, because we deal with serious matters, but we laughing too, you know? So anyhow, that may be a nasty joke. So, the next thing is, I think that on a more serious reference, there should be enhanced committee presence. Like, I think that the one thing that probably you could borrow from the United States, I know a lot of you out there think you could borrow everything, but I think we have a superior system to the United States system. But we can borrow that committee system that they use very effectively in relation to their legislators to examine a whole set of things that need fine-tuning or fine examination and scrutiny. So I think that you should have an enhanced committee presence in terms of looking at what might be reformed. And of course, the one that everybody likes to jump on, the issue of the Prime Minister's powers. And if you're going to be a Westminster system, I'll come back to that. This is going to be a very critical thing to deal with in a mature way. Because if you don't know what you're dealing with, if you don't know how it got there, and you go tampering with it, the whole thing might collapse. And maybe the Prime Minister's position is critical to the upholding of the whole business. So just going to deal with the minimalist and maximalist thing. If you all saw the way that I engaged the discussion on the Republic, you would have noticed that I chose actually a minimalist approach. I hope I don't go on talking too long. In relation to how we can get to the Republic, because I knew that with the big egos that most of us human beings have, everybody want to talk and talk long and feel that what they're saying is the most important thing, and some of them that don't even know what they're talking about want to talk, you know? And when you tell them, you give them something as nice and meaty and tempting as a constitution to debate, man, they will debate to the end of the earth. And I felt that in that context, that we would not yet have a republic. And as the chairman said, the distinction between a monarchy, which we were, and a republic is to carry away the monarch. You just move the monarch. And when you move the monarch, you got a republic. Now you will have to do some fine-tuning even at that very basic level. You're going to have a number of things you have to cascade. You know, the police can't be the Royal Barbados Police Force tomorrow and all that kind of stuff. You know, a lot of these people that talk about on their King's Council now, they should really be state council. State council. I don't know what king they can be referring to now, but you know, I'm not so sure about this sir thing. And somebody call it the most honorable. There's some things that the British have done that are very useful in their culture. They like to name places in terms of what they're doing. You know, if you're gambling, you can't go gambling alley. And you say, sir, it's just a fairly basic, respectful comment, you know, to somebody. You know, I got Warren, I look at Gabby, I say, the most honorable Gabby. I won't take that as a bad, I insult anybody, okay? But sometimes we can go too far in relation to these things. And probably, I hope, I'm saying that with some care, I hope. But my point is that I emphasize going the shortest narrowest, easiest route in order to get to an objective, because I've seen so much in my life now, even going through my revolutionary stage of my life, that if you ask for too much sometimes, you don't get anything. And that when you ask, when you study the thing carefully and see what is the essential character of what is there, and you just carve it out like a surgeon, you get some healing, or you get betterment. And then you can start improving on the body, giving them all kind of nutrition and food and all that down the road to build them up and make them strong over time, so that they can then last out and they can be resilient and all that. But if you start trying to do everything at the beginning, you might never get to the point of actually carrying out the change. And that was my reason for choosing minimalism over maximalism. Linked to that is the issue of the ground zero. We have some idealistic people around, and I was idealist at one time. So I know what it is to be driven by with youth and wanting to change everything. And I want to change the world. I want to change Barbados, definitely. Can't do it now. And maybe I have some regrets why I didn't change the world. The Royal look at me very hard, but but he's like trying to block me, and had a big, massive Barbados workers. You can block anything, and Bobby do. Two of them can block anything, man. So you had to face that reality and live with it, But in any event, you probably didn't need it either. When I went to Cuba and looked at the Museum of the Revolution, and I looked in certain showcases, I saw shoes full of blood stains. Okay? Those people were killed over years, decades. They were killing people, shooting them down. And consequently, you get to a point where everything is reduced to nothing. The fellas say we got to take up arms to defend ourselves and our families and fight back. But that's the only way we're going to be able to exist. I say you can't reach there in Barbados, and in the period that Hillary Beckles likes to call the bad times or whatever, the barbarous times, the slavery, we had some rebellions, and Bussa did that, gave his life, in terms of that fight, because that's an existential issue. However, you got to be born at the right time and in the right space, and for to be in a condition where there's that need for struggling at the existential level. And we are not reduced to ground zero in Barbados at this moment that somebody had the political will to say, let's move to a republic. So because we move to a republic, we don't suddenly don't go for the transition. In any event, republic don't mean that you're going maximalist. Republic just means what you said, take away the queen or the monarch or whatever and put something else there. So that we more or less go then for, we do not go to ground zero, and we do not have to build from the base up. We don't necessarily have to be elaborate. We have the time or the opportunity to say, let's look at what we have and let's do the best thing in those circumstances. We have not been reduced to ground zero. If you're reduced to ground zero, you see, you could have something like a constituent assembly in the midst of the struggle over what should replace this society that our constitution or government has been destroyed. And you ask people to come together just to build that constitution. We are not there. That's not what we're doing. We got a constitution. I hear a fellow that comes on the radio all the time talking about we ain't got no constitution. The absolute nonsense. I'll not even tell him that. But most of us know that you're talking absolute nonsense. Because otherwise we won't be able to function as a civilized society. So we have a constitution in place. It ain't the best of constitution either. But what we should be doing, given the circumstances that are around us, the context, is that we're going to do the best in this opportunity where the political will was created to say, this is a time that we can carry out changes. In that context also, I want to deal with the way that you should deal with colonialism in a mature way. And again, people are not accustomed probably to this kind of view. And then they'll say, well, this man is a revolutionary saying this. I could say that I was a revolutionary. So I am. Okay? So that's having a word or nothing. But if you know, understand what revolutionary is, revolutionaries have minimalist programs when they know that the conditions are not right for the maximalist position. That's what Clement Payne had in the 1930s when he said, agitate, educate, and don't violate. That was minimalist, a minimalist program to transform a colonial, oligarchic, racist system in Barbados. And he was a revolutionary, trained revolutionary too, as the historians have discovered over time. But he said all the way back in 1977, it was 1974 as a matter of fact. I knew that by looking at certain things in the archives. But then they did the third thing to say, well, we know for certain now, like man was trained in Trinidad to be a Marxist agitator. And he sent to Barbados to stir up Barbados. But when he himself, when he comes here, he's going to make an assessment of what is the politics that is possible in that condition. And he knew that a minimalist program should go in. Create a liberal democratic system if you can. Because that is what will free up the people initially, and then we can struggle for more. And this goes back in the big classical discussions you would have, if you know the literature, between people like Rosa Luxemburg and Vladimir Lenin and so on. She disagreed with Lenin, you know. She was a German Marxist revolutionary. That is Rosa Luxemburg, and as against Lenin. She argued that, you know, that the conditions in Russia, for instance, were not right for any revolution at that time because he gonna have to depend on peasants and on a backward political system. And whenever you're done, you're gonna end up frustrating everybody. She felt Germany would have been a better base for carrying out transformation. As many people would tell you, the United States is one of the best places to carry out socialism. You think Trump will ever let you do that? And he got the power to stop you. And of course, if you are a dialectician, the socialism that you're talking about now is not the socialism that we practice in most of the 20th century either. That thing is dead, barren, moribund, and backward now. And still, you now got to do work as a revolutionary to project. And we can be a part of that, even at our limited level in relation to what we could do for the Republic. The object really is to be building a new, fresh, vibrant, strong, positive society. That's what revolutionary is about. Not about making noise and going fighting nobody or anything like that. But if you can try to fight me because I say so, I might fight you back. And that is what it was said. And you see, that is what a revolutionary is, and so on and so forth. I'm interested in fighting nobody. But I'm not a coward neither. And I'm a soldier. Okay? Yes. Now, my time up? No, I got time, right? Good, okay, good. Because I only 3/4, 1/3 way. 1/3 way through, actually. No? I said 3/4. Anyhow, the issue of liberty. Very important, you see, because going back, you see that things are linked. If you don't have the Cuba Museum illustration that I gave, you are not likely to create a regime that is going to have to fight down the people who killed the trade unionists. Those people who are ruthless enough to kill the trade unionists will kill you too, and you have to be able to block them. The problem there is that the cost, when you have to put up an administration now to stop them from killing you, is that liberty might be lost. And liberty is actually a very important quality. When we are doing our reform, try not to get carried away to the point that you say the will of the people, the majority of people must prevail. Yes, that is the correct revolution, not revolution, that is the correct political position in a democracy to hold, as I said earlier, Even when you're going to lunch, you must vote to go to lunch. Now, if you have too much liberty, you can have a problem. Like what's going on in the States right now. You're a man that is trying to overthrow a liberal democracy, is walking about free. He should have been locked up ever since, whoever that body is, okay? He has no right walking about anywhere. Man is a dangerous person to humanity, okay? And they allowed him to walk out because liberty allows him to walk out, because you're not supposed, in liberty, with liberty, you're not supposed to have any domination over you as an individual. Lamin helps us to understand that too, huh? George Lamin. A very beautiful language. Let me see where it is now. Where I put that on? Lord have mercy. Okay, from the Seasons of Adventure. He had a fellow, Powell, talking in the Season of Adventure. And Powell said, and I quote this quite often in many of the presentations that I make, Locke, the philosopher Locke of Britain said it, of Englishman said it as well. He said, freedom from domination by any other, that's the state of nature. And it was carried in the French Revolution, in the American Revolution, and so on. Matter of fact, the American Revolution is a Lockean revolution. And Lamin says it as a Bayesian understanding freedom, and we should be very persons that are very concerned with liberty and freedom because we become a slave society. He said, Powell says, free is how you is from the start. And when it look different, you gotta move. Just move. And when you're moving, say that it's a natural freedom make you move. Free is how you is from the start. And when it look different, you got to move, just move. And when you move and say that it's a natural freedom make you move. That is what we need to preserve. But if you carry the other position too far, that is to say, the majority must prevail. The majority must prevail, but it must not turn into a tyranny over the minority position. Now, when you are in a position where you have not reached ground zero, when you are in a position where the new administration does not defend itself from death, you can afford the luxury of liberty. And it's good that you can afford the luxury of liberty, because liberty is a very important thing to human existence, the liberty of the individual. In the American Constitution, they are more for liberty than for democracy, which is why, again, all the crimes with guns going out, the man could walk out with an assault rifle and kill him because he's free to have the gun. Or if you reduce that liberty a bit, you take away the gun from him until you can't go out and kill children. But no, they're so frightened to touch the liberty that they allow him to walk out place with assault rifles, killing people. You go to the Soviet Union when it existed, and they will tell you something called democratic centralism, which is to say that the will of the majority must always prevail. And if you are a minority, shut up until the will prevails. The problem there too is that in a situation like that, a group of people can start to say that they are the majority. We see it here with our radical groups. So you have fellas that got 4 people in an organization and just go out and say, man, the people say, and the Caribbean say, and all kind of things. Oh, that's too many. But I know of an instance where one fella confronted a Nigerian ambassador and told the Nigerian man, the Caribbean says, the ambassador said, look, when I'm talking, the foreign minister is behind me. When you're talking, I don't see no Caribbean, I see you. And that's one of the problems, okay? So we have to be careful with that as well. So, because you can have a tyranny in the majority. You can have a tyranny in the majority. If you live in some societies and the majority is so dominant that you can't open your mouth, they will shut you up. So that liberty is a luxury, and if you have it, treasure it, and by the circumstances, particular circumstances, would that will facilitate it. Of course, the time now, but again, not the time now. Yeah, okay, so again, run through the ones that are just raised so that you can have something to discuss and so on. The proportional versus first past the post system, one of the relevant issues I think that you should look at with reform. I think that proportional representation could probably be mixed, but with the first past the post, you got to be very careful there. I am for first past the post because I think it is the representative system that gives the population, the electorate, scrutiny over the person who is going to be representative. When you do the proportional representation system, you got lists, they got a whole set of fellas that hide. They got no political skill really, and some of them ain't even interested in people. They want to get in parliament. And they get in parliament on the basis of being on the list. And they have a percentage, something some people are supposed to get, now that percentage, they're gone in. If you put them in a place where first party posts running, they can't win a seat. They don't have the ability to win a seat. And they're not interested in representing people either. And what the first party post does is to pull that out and make people understand if you're in the use, go home and stay home. But you could have, let's say in the House of Assembly, you can have probably 5 people elected on a national basis on proportional representation. And then the rest, the other 30, let's say if you got 35, the other 30 then represented on first past the post. The danger there all the same is that if you get then a kind of 15-15 or thing out of the 30 that represented on the constituency basis, the 5 fellas could become very powerful. One could become prime minister. And the people don't really want him to be the prime minister. Or the parliamentarians also want him to be the prime minister. So that is the danger. So you got to be very careful when you're tampering with these things. And the safest thing for us right now is first past the post. Proportional representation also creates an unstable kind of government. First past the post gives you stability, and the majority can seem to get its way. Proportional representation, all kinds of them monkey people can get 2 seats and manipulate the system, and next thing you know, they're prime minister today. They say Vincent one time, the fellow that how one seat or say, he's the only man, but they say, but you want government or you don't want government? And you got to bargain with him. You say, well, you want to be prime minister? They say, well, you're going to be prime minister because you want the government. So he becomes prime minister, and he man's a joker. And everybody can suffer while he's joking. So I don't think we got to go there. But anyway, that is something that is just to make you think and to say where we want to possibly go, I mentioned in passing before the thing about the technology, where you can have the thing where people can press in and say, they're debating biscuits today, and the biscuits say, all debating we don't like, and so on and so forth. But the problem there is that that can be abused, and they should not have legitimacy because, in other words, they can't change the decision of the people that are represented because they have not faced the polls. All they have is a piece of apparatus, a device that they can press and say, we don't like what you're all talking about or the way you're all talking. And of course, it could be 6 members of one family, as I said before. I might be saying so. And the other thing that I said was the enhanced committee presidents. I think we should look at that fairly carefully to see how we could integrate that into our process of parliament so that we have more, again, the form of increased scrutiny too. Make certain people face the elected representatives in terms of either what they have done or not done, or if they want a particular position, let them get looked at carefully by people that are elected. The Prime Minister's powers, the last thing, I will wrap up. If you touch that, that has emerged over time. There are the things about the system, the British system, that we might reject it in terms of colonialism and all that, is that it is nonetheless a system that has evolved on the basis of human struggle. And if you take away the British colonial thing, what you have is human struggle that also created what is there. And some of the things, therefore, that they've created are useful for humanity. Now, the Prime Minister's thing evolved also because of a whole lot of machinations and so on, so the Prime Minister becomes dominant. But in the sense that the Prime Minister is an anchor, that if you take that out, you can have all kind of trivial political behavior going on, which can push your system into instability and even collapse. In the Westminster system. The Westminster system is very dependent on that Prime Minister being able to say, I could call the election anytime, and they could fire anybody. And if you take that power away from them, you're going to have people that want to fire the Prime Minister every minute, and they will last for 2 minutes, and then they will get rid of him too, and all you'll be doing is turning over in turmoil, or turning over in turmoil and chaos, and doing nothing. So also do that as well. And they tell me that you must thank me now, so that I thank myself and thank you for listening.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but we have to move on. Without any intermediate discussion from me, I'm going to the second of the two persons who are leading discussion to try to help us focus in our presentations when we make those presentations to the Commission. And that second person is Honorable Robert Morris, and he's speaking about high points in parliamentary and constitutional development. High points in parliamentary and constitutional development. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Protocol has been set, so welcome to everybody. Thank you very much for a good ground to start on. I have interpreted my remit as looking at what I call nodal points over the history of Barbados in terms of when there were significant changes to our political environment or constitutional development. And those nodal points, that concept was used by George when he wrote about Samuel Jackman Prescott. And he looked at the Prescott in the period in which Samuel Jackman operated and what were the issues that came to the fore that Prescott had to deal with. I've identified about 6 nodal periods. And I wish to start by recognizing that, in fact, Barbados is pure colonial status went from 1625 to 1649 in the first instance, where there was the old British monarchy in place until, of course, there was a challenge by Parliament against the British monarchy, and Barbados became a republic. This is the second time we're going into Republican status, not the first. We became a republic between 1649 and 1660. Barbados controlled itself. In fact, the Charter of Barbados, 1652, which is still in our Constitution, in the preamble to our Constitution, set out very clearly that the Barbados position of 1651 and 1652, where those persons like Drax and others, the group, what would you call in those days, the Puritans, the Roundheads, they were very much against the Cavaliers, they were very much against the Stuarts, etc. And they felt that although they were only at the beginning of starting development in this small country, that they should be doing it on their own. They wanted to be able to trade with whomever they wanted, and they were doing a very good trade with the Dutch, and they were very clear in their mind that they did not need the weight of a monarchy to hold them down. The problem is, though, that Cromwell and his son couldn't carry the revolution. And in fact, after Cromwell died, his son, Cromwell became what they call the protector for a while. You remember, those of us who had to do English history, it might be a little strange for people who did West Indian history, but for those who had to do English history, we understand very clearly that sometimes when we think we're going forward, we might be going back, in the sense that these things happened before. And we're now moving back to the stage where now a different set of people are taking up that challenge now to become a republic. So we will get there. So the first nodal point we were talking about is that we were a colony, a pure colony, then we became a republic, and then we went back into colonial status again, and that colonial status went right down to 1966. A very, very long time. But I want to make the point that in all of these nodal areas I'm speaking about, there was some kind of violence, some kind of activism that moved us from one state to the other. I will point them out systematically, one state after the other. This is the only one that we are moving to peacefully. We are going into this state as a republic with the total support of the entire country. I have heard no groups of any significance challenging or questioning that this is what we have to do now. And that's very important. There's that consensus in Barbados today. All of the parties, and we have to recognize that there are parties, however they may be doing, but all of the parties in Barbados at this time recognize that this is the time when Barbados is ready to become a republic, and that's very important. So we have started to do all the things that were necessary to get us to the stage now where we have to deliver to the Constitutional Commission, to those persons who have to set up the framework for us. And then, of course, it goes to Parliament, presumably, and Parliament will do what it has to do. So let's look at some of these stages that we're talking that we passed through. As I said, we had the constitutional position from 1649 to 1660. And then we have this long period of time between 1650 to, I take it to 1816. That is where we had what is known as the Bustle Rebellion, etc. Because I believe that a lot of the challenges that came up there was about the issue of lack of freedom, lack of rights. What drove, it was not only the slaves, it was the free colors. It was that women had no rights, etc. We look all the time at the slave rebellion. That was fundamental, of course. But the reality is that the free colors were trying to get rights. Free colors were trying to be able to vote. They were trying to be able to own property and to be citizens also. So up to 1816, when we had our first serious uprising in Barbados, there had been several before. There had been 1649, there had been 1674. Of course, Professor Beckles has been writing consistently on these, so I think Barbadians are very clear nowadays that we were not quiet, we were not quiescent. All of the laws that were passed in 1661 to say that we were chattel, we never accepted that. But we could not do much based on the circumstances because we were dealing with raw power. That raw power by the plantocracy kept us in place. So we understand that, and therefore we have always to look back, and that's why we have periodized, in a sense, our heroes. For each one of these nodal points, we'll be able to find a hero or heroes who symbolize, basically, freedom. That's the important thing about them. When we're talking about bustle, and I'm going to make the point, and I make it all the time, I think we've been totally unfair to Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin. I want to make the point again. Franklin was a hero. And I think we have done him an injustice. And I believe that injustice is because he had some white blood in him. What absolute nonsense. So many people inside here have white blood in them too, even though they look black. So I don't believe that that is a sensible thing on which to make positions, and I believe we have to look back at the whole issue of the role of, as we go into this new phase of freedom. Look back at Franklin, and the same thing I say about Reeves when I get there, I will probably expand a bit more, but Reeves was a hero too. Reeves was a hero. He was not a hero, as George was saying, about persons who at that time talked about a kind of socialism and a kind of behavior. we don't have to have the same philosophy to be very strong in what we believe. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I'm jumping here, but going back. But Conrad Reeves, when he suggested the executive committee, that alone should make him a hero, because that executive committee stopped this from becoming a crown colony. Understand that? That stopped us from becoming a crown colony government. That was Reeves. Reeves had certain difficulties, presumably, in terms of the activities in the 1876 disturbances. He confined himself allied with certain groups. He didn't feel comfortable about it. And I think when I heard George at this time, George is reflecting sometimes that over the period you can be a very rabid revolutionary in the sense of wanting to change things, but in time. And that is why when we looked at, for instance, Grantley Adams, there were people who felt that Grantley should be more of a, what they call a rebel, a radical, and so on. And I like the way how Anthony Phillips deals with him. Phillips had a very good paper that he did on Grantley. I think it was in 1998 that he published in the Journal of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, where he saw that Grantley looked at what was happening with so-called socialism at that time, where it was going. And he decided to remain as a liberal. But when you look at what he wanted as a liberal, it is very much what most of us here would accept. And what a lot of us call democratic socialism is just a small variation in behaviors. So sometimes we have these strong definitions and these strong differences. Now, I have to put in here, of course, Clennell, although we come to him later on. Clennell was stronger in terms of his socialism. And again, I'm not sure we've given him the kind of recognition that he deserves in this country. Clennell Wickham was one of the best minds and one of the best brains in terms of advancing the concept of freedom. He would be 100% behind what we are doing today. He would support it totally because he had a strong view that we, people like us, all of us here, were quite capable and competent even at that time, not only to give our lives on behalf of a mother country and protecting the wealth of a plantocracy, but we had to have the right to be able to make our own decisions about ourselves. But they did not have that right. So picking back up in the next phase, which is the phase that goes on to 1876, that problem was still there. People could not vote. That simple issue, and I'll give you some statistics here to suggest what is happening when you're talking about the franchise going up to 1876. Let me give you an idea why later on Clennell and others felt so disturbed about what was happening. In 1858, the population was 154,000 persons. There were 1,220 registered voters. 0.78% of the population could vote. In the year of the disturbances, 1876, the population was 162,042. 1,664 registered voters. 1.02% of the population. 1902, population growing, 182,306. Registered voters, 1,721, 0.94% of the population. So in other words, these persons who had been freed at emancipation were being stifled by the plantocracy. And I can go through that, but again, I don't think we have that time because we have to move on. But every law that could be passed to stifle black persons, the Vagrancy Act, Immigration Act, anything to keep you poor, to keep you in a trash hut, that is what was being put on the people of Barbados, the working class people of Barbados. And that is why General Beard and Green and all of them joined with John Pope Hennessy, the Irishman, and Thomas Graham Briggs, a radical. The Briggs family has always been a radical family. It was radical in the time of the 1860s, the 1816 rebellion. They were very radical. Thomas Graham Briggs was radical. They had to hang them out of Barbados. He bought a lot of land in Nevis, etc. But we always think that there was a sort of a total agreement in terms of white approach to politics in the 19th century, but that's not true. There were some white groups that were far more radical than others. And I would say, as far as I'm concerned, when I studied the period, I'm looking at people like, and he had to run and leave Barbados, Thomas Graham Briggs. Briggs was a radical. Briggs was a definite radical. And he was working along with Pope Hennessy because he felt that enough was not being done for black people in Barbados. The one point that I disagreed with them was that they wanted to confederate Barbados with the Windward Islands. They wanted to follow the model that had gone ahead in 1871. There was a Leeward Island Federation with Benjamin Pine. And of course, Briggs had a lot of property. He owned almost all of Nevis, etc. So he was on that federation. And he saw how it was easier for the black people to get improvements in their lives than it was in Barbados, where because of the old oligarchic system, the same group of people continued to keep people in thrall. And of course, people like Prescott and others were making the point that you will get some migration. If you went into federation with the Windward and so on, you'll be able to, you can't get any land here. You will never get any land in Barbados, but if you went down to the islands, the new territories that had been taken and captured, you will be able at least to start off with some land. And we all know that, quite frankly, in a democracy, if you don't have some land, you're really not a citizen of status. So the important thing was land, that land hunger. When you came off the plantation, you wanted land. And you were not going to get it in Barbados. And there's still people out there struggling to get land in Barbados. That is still one of our major challenges that freedom, full freedom, and the full question of becoming a republic has to address. That question of how we deal with the land. Of course, we recognize that you can't get all romantic and go thinking that you can take away all the land, because latifunding is important in terms of the economics of it. But you have to get people that at least have places where they can live, where they can put house spots, etc., and not be treated with any, how should I put it? It should not be made to feel second-class citizens. If somebody can get a spot of land to put a house on, it doesn't have to be 5 or 10 acres, but we have to make sure that as far as possible that you do some redistribution of land. I leave that to the technical people to get into that further discussion as we come into the present. But that was one of the major problems up to 1876. So you're going to the third mortal point. Between 1876 and 1937, big revolution again in such a short period of time. Between 1876 and 1937, we were into revolutionary mode again. And I think George has, in fact, I remember when I started looking closely at Barbadian history, the two theses that I read was Sir Richard's thesis who looked at the politics, the political systems in Barbados, and George's thesis. Those were the two that I knew about that had been written about Barbados, basically in an analytical way. And they're probably still in the library, and I don't know how many people have had a chance to read them, but it would do you well to read them if you like reading, and if you want to study serious work that has been done by our academics, because I also want to put in the plug that, in fact, the Cave Hill University, branch of the University of the West Indies, has done a tremendous amount of work in terms of pushing an understanding of our politics and of our local history. I want to put that plug, quite frankly. Cave Hill has done a tremendous amount of work in getting people to understand the history that we are hooked into. One of the problems, I think, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I do not know if it's being taught in the schools, because I understand that a long time ago we moved away from teaching pure history and we're going into social studies. But I may be wrong, and you can correct me. And listen, I remember Leroy Innes, Judge Innes, wrote a book in 1983 on civics in Barbados. Anybody ever read that book? Some people have it. Do you know that probably most children in Barbados never ever read that book? Because unless you make provision for the subject to be taught, your children are not going to read it. Every Barbadian child should be reading about civics, which looks at a lot of the things that we're talking about here tonight. And it helps them to understand where we've come from and where we have to go. So I go back again then into my trend and say the 1937 disturbances was one of those nodal points. It puts us forward. And one of the things it did was to make a big change in terms of making provision for voting. So let's look at what had happened then in the 1920s in terms of registered votes and the population. And you're going to be shocked again that nothing was happening until a change was made in in voting patterns. In the year 1925, population 156,311, registered voters just over 3,000. 156,000 persons and just over 3,000 could be registered to vote. In 1930, and this is all the time now to when Payne and these fellows have to agitate. 1930, 159,000 in the population, 5,000 people being able to vote. In 1940, you will see the numbers moving a little bit from 179,000 to just about 6,931. But by 1945, 191,000 population, 20,000 registered voters. And that is because the law was changed. That is because Sir Grantley and others realized that you had to make changes. Don't wait for it to happen because the people who were in control weren't going to do it. So you had to push off the oligarchy. I call them the oligarchy, the plantocracy, whatever you call them. You had to push them off. You had to take them off the scene. And people like ourselves have to come forward to make the changes. Now, that is not about race or anything like that. That's about self-interest. That's about self-interest. And that is about change. Time. For all the centuries, 1625, right away down, they were controlling, not getting us a look in. And we will be afraid when we become the numbers. We're propping up the economy, all our work, our minds, our bodies, creating that wealth. We don't want to come in and make massive changes. No, didn't make sense. And therefore people like O'Neill and people like Grantley Adams and all of them. I don't want young people to misunderstand or undervalue what happened at that time. We take these things for granted. But all of them were afraid. Don't think that Grant, he wasn't afraid that he would lose his job, he wouldn't get a pick, he wouldn't get work, that somebody be set to shoot him down. We need to understand, politics is serious business. It's about power, it's about wealth, and people will do things. People will do things to maintain power and wealth. They will do that. They will keep a whole race of people subjugated if they have to do that. And then some people have to come and free them and change the whole dynamics. And that is happening all right now. That is what we're in. We're part of that freedom. That is where we're off to. So I would like to say that, quite frankly, we are into the phase now, the last nodal phase. That nodal phase that started in the 20s and the 30s. And we are now climaxing that nodal phase. And in fact, I would want to say that the phase where our Parliamentary, along with the Progressive Conservatives, I think Mr. Motley was at the time the leader of the opposition, and Freddie Miller would have represented, I think, the Barbados Labour Party.
Also Tom and Bree. Also Tom and Bree.
And Bree went. And Bree went.
And Tom. And Tom too, I think.
Pardon me?
Freddie Miller, Bree.
Freddie Miller and Bree for the Barbados Labour Party, yes. And Motley was for the Progressive Conservatives. Right. And it would be Barra and Cammy Tudor and some other people. He had quite a team, quite frankly.
Vaughan.
Right, Vaughan, and he had also some expert advisors, and he had Holder, Gene Holder, and some others who would be then, at the time, public servants operating out of England. But he had a team, and he knew what he wanted, and he got what he wanted up to this point in time. Now, there has been a question about why we did not go directly into the stage we're going to now. Why we didn't go into Republican status then?
Only country in the Caribbean that was Dominica. Dominica is the only one that became a republic.
Yes, yes. But I believe I think we were wise, quite frankly. I think that at that time, I think we would have left external affairs in the hands of Britain. And in the 1960s and so on, at that time, we might have felt that we didn't have the kind of resources to control that area and that we could move there at a particular time. I'm just thinking that that's possibly one of the things why we didn't go there. But I know that another reason why we didn't go there, quite frankly, is that Barbadians still love the Queen. Up to 1966, Barbadians still loved the Queen. They were enamored with the whole notion of British sovereignty. And up to recently, there are still people in Barbados who are not too sure if we're doing the right or the wrong thing in becoming a republic. We have to understand these things because that is part of the brainwashing that has gone on for years. It's been there, you understand, and therefore that is part of the history. I believe now, though, quite frankly, that if any survey was done in Barbados, that 99.9% of the persons are very happy in terms of moving on to Republican status. The notion about a relationship with the British sovereign will be a relationship, but a relationship of our president having a status that is similar to theirs, and not one where we are looking down to them or looking up to them, for that matter. Right? So I think that we are into this nodal phase now where we have to establish the Constitution, one that is acceptable to the masses of the people, and I would advise and I would say that I think that we're approaching it in the right way. We had talked on occasions before that we should have had a referendum, but I think this is superior to a referendum. I think that by having Barbadians going out and speaking to Barbadians, that it would help them to be able to ask questions and to hear a bit about where we came from and where we have to go. I will take my stop at this time, and pass back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Morris. Let's move quickly then to the third of our guest speakers. Peter Wickham is asked by us to talk about the composition of Parliament. That is cutting closer to the bone. And subtitling this is the need for him to discuss the rights and the privileges of the Prime Minister, I mean the office of the Prime Minister, and the offices of members of Parliament. So the title is The Composition of Parliament, particularly the rights and privileges of the office of Prime Minister and of members of Parliament. Peter, you have the mic.
Okay, thank you, Sir Roy, and I want to thank you the committee for inviting me to participate in this conversation, which is to offer suggestions on the modification of the role and function of Parliament, which is at the center of our democracy. And I think we've been fortunate in Barbados to have two opportunities, not only at the level of the constitutional review, but certainly at the level of Parliament in particular, to reflect on these conversations. I was particularly struck as we came this afternoon that the panel has a significant imbalance in that 4 of the 5 members on the panel are foundation old scholars. And I take the opportunity to revel in the fact that we have finally put college in a corner. And Dr. Bell is suitably seated at the end of the seat. So I'm happy that this is in a sense, this is also a revolution of sorts. Of course, the Clerk of Parliament is also of similar ilk, so we are indeed in good company. I want to start on a positive note. I'm essentially going to give some ideas on things that I think we need to be thinking about going forward. It's useful that you've had both a historical and also a philosophical frame for the conversation, and I'm going to get to, one could say, the meat of the matter in some instances and give some direct suggestions. And I want to start on a positive note that in terms of bringing the work of Parliament to the people, we made a move some years ago in terms of putting the conversations of Parliament on the World Wide Web through Parliament's website. And I remember when I had a conversation with the Clerk of Parliament who is with us today, and he indicated that they were going to make the conversations available on people's desktop. And the logic was really simple, that it was offensive to the concept of people's participation, that we should have to be classified as strangers to go into that place, be searched and frisked and be told that you can't speak or say anything, as opposed to being able to listen to these things on firstly radio and now it's essentially on the web. I think that is a significant step in the right direction, and essentially it puts us ahead of the curve in terms of bringing Parliament to the people. I am told that there are certain restrictions in terms of the broadcast and the repetition of those broadcasts. I'm not sure about the technical details, but there are supposed to be some limitations on what you can do with the material that comes out in that forum, and I would think that the removal of these types of restrictions would perhaps be a good place to start. My sense is that most of them are not really observed other than in the breach anyhow. So, why not? Let's just remove them completely. There's a small matter of the role of the chaplain, which to my mind makes absolutely no sense. There's a chaplain in Parliament. I'm not sure what functional purpose the chaplain serves other than to give opening sentences at the beginning, which is a religious exercise. To the best of my knowledge, we are a state that is not religious. We are secular. And it has always been confusing to me that we start sittings of Parliament with prayers. To my mind, it has no place in a secular society. I believe that the chaplain is paid, and I think that this would be a good place to start in terms of reform, to remove the chaplain, or alternatively, replace the chaplain with perhaps a person who can offer counsel to members of Parliament in a psychological way or something like that. Or alternatively, have several chaplains, because it is entirely possible that shortly we will have a member of Parliament in the upper house who is a Muslim, So maybe we should have a Muslim chaplain, we should have a Rastafarian chaplain, and all of the other religions will be respected. So my thing is that if you're going to do this and not respect all of the religions, then have none. And that would be an easy place to start. Thank you very much for the applause, gentlemen. I appreciate that, because I know that this is a controversial issue. On to more weighty matters, which I think that we just dispense with the slightly lighter ones in the beginning. Over the years, I have asked people in surveys why they vote, and this is an effort to find out what motivates people to go and vote at the polls. Generally, the responses have isolated issues like leadership, so they vote for a prime minister, they vote on the basis of party loyalty, they often vote in favor of attractive national policies, education being one of them. People have voted for those reasons. There are a few people who will say, well, I voted because I got a road in my constituency, and things of that nature. The estimates will vary, but generally speaking, 10% of people or less are motivated by the candidate.
What percent?
10% or less. Say they vote because they like the candidate. So I'm voting for Peter Wickham because I like Peter Wickham as a person. There is various empirical and anecdotal data also that will support that argument. I noticed that Reverend Adderley is part of the community here today. Reverend Adderley can tell you that he was overwhelmingly supported in 2018 as a member of the Barbados Labour Party, and 3 years later, he struggled to save his deposit. Same person, but presenting himself differently and a completely different outcome. To my mind, this isolates the fact that there is a need for Parliament to express the will of the people, other than in the context of this first-past-the-post vote, which I support, notwithstanding anything Dr. Bell would say. I support the first-past-the-post system. But we have a situation where people vote for an individual, which is how the first-past-the-post system determines it. But in reality, they are voting for a party, they are voting nationally, and they are voting in support of a leader in many instances. Leadership, and this is across the Caribbean, is one of the main reasons why people vote and why people vote against. They vote for a leader they like, or they vote against a leader they detest. And sometimes it changes very, very quickly in the course of time. For us to have parliamentary reform and not give the opportunity for people to express their true desire in terms of their voting activity is something that I think is unfortunate. And I think if it is anything that we achieve in relation to the work at this committee, it has to be something like that. There are two ways that we can do it. The easiest one, interestingly enough, was recommended some years ago by the brother of Wendell McLean, the brother of one of your commissioners, Maxine McLean. And Wendell, who was the senator at the time, his idea was that we should have a vote nationally, as we do now, and then the numbers that supported the individual party should make up the Senate, and that the Senate should be converted into a body which represents the political parties on the basis of numbers. To me, that's an easy solution to this problem, because you get to vote locally, but that has an implication in terms of what happens at the national level. So Parliament then essentially reflects that, and there's a balance in terms of the local representatives, which is where the majority of the power lies, and what happens in the Senate in terms of the national. That's one. There's another slightly more complex approach, which I'm hoping that you gentlemen can give some consideration to. This is something that I've actually heard being expressed by other people. Similar to what was done in the British Virgin Islands. British Virgin Islands maintains what they call at-large representatives. So these are persons who are voted for not on the basis of representing the constituency, but are voting on the basis of the at-large reality. I'm going to try to explain it very quickly and not to take up too much time, but it's a useful technique because the British Virgin Islands has a peculiar problem in that it's a tiny island, has a large number of representatives, and one of the problems that they have, which is one of the problems that we are getting, is that constituencies are becoming so small that person can essentially buy an election. So when you represent 20,000 people, it's hard to buy an election. When you represent 500 people, it's relatively easy. We had a situation in Antigua recently where a gentleman effectively bought a seat, right? I am not speaking out of turn by saying that because I've done some research and I've demonstrated conclusively that if you look at what happened in that election, he had a significant increase in people moving into that constituency for good reason, and then a significant increase in terms of those people moving in, voting for him. And then, of course, you had hams and turkeys and considerable financial wealth being thrown behind the whole exercise. And the gentleman is now a member of Parliament, right? Only independent to win a seat in the Caribbean in recent times. Right? It's a problem for democracy because, to me, it frustrates the whole idea of what people vote for and what not. So the BVI saw that happening and decided they need to have another tier, and they call that the at-large representative. So you have the balance. So you have the people who represent small numbers, and they can buy their seat if they have enough resources. But then you have the at-large individuals who are elected nationally. I do hope that we can get to the stage where we elect national representatives. Maybe they can support a party, or maybe they can't support a party. And you know, over the years, there have been people who, in my view, would have been far better national representatives because they struggled at the local level. I think of Bree St. John, for example, who was also a foundation man, coincidentally, would probably have been a brilliant national representative, but he struggled. I mean, my good friend and panelist, Bobby Morris, dealt with him in 1986 and created history as Prime Minister, being the first Prime Minister that was beaten and defeated. Clyde Maskell on the other side, if we're going to be completely balanced, to my mind, would also have made an excellent national representative. So I'm saying that we have these two options where we can either go with the McLean proposal or we can go with the at-large proposal, but the whole idea is to reform Parliament and give us the opportunity to vote nationally, which is ultimately what people like to do. A related matter is a whole question of the control of the parliamentary agenda, which is now directly in the purview of the Prime Minister and Cabinet that control the parliamentary agenda. Senators, as I understand, they can ask questions, but senators cannot really force debate on particular issues, and neither can the man in the street. To my mind, this is wrong. I think that the idea of having people's initiatives was mentioned by Sir Henry Ford in his contribution to the reform exercise, and I think that we need to revisit that. We now have the ability with the use of the web to have people's initiatives based on petitions, which, if generate enough signatures, can hopefully prompt a national vote in support of our national discussion in support of an issue or issues that may come up. The thing that comes to mind most in that regard is this whole issue of ganja. Because based on the information available to me, a lot of Barbadians smoke ganja. Based on the information available to me, the average Barbadian is far more progressive in his attitude towards ganja use than the government is. And I don't mean the government in terms of the BLP government. Both governments, historically, to me, have been more conservative than they needed to be. If we had initiatives like this, we could have forced a previous government or this current government into a conversation about decriminalizing ganja and getting a move on in relation to dealing with this thing, which has been a social problem in Barbados for a long time. But we don't have a facility like that. So that's something that I believe we should think about. The United Kingdom has a reasonable model, a reasonably good model, where if you get a sufficiently large number of signatures, you can force Parliament to debate the issue. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that anything will come of it, but I do feel that if you were able to use that and perhaps have the Senate involved in terms of bringing some of those conversations to the fore, it would give us the opportunity to make Parliament a far more representative institution and body that reflects the people's will. I'm also concerned about the extent to which we rely on the Westminster protocols to guide Parliament in terms of the work that it does. There's some interesting rules in Parliament. The Speaker is supposed to be an independent body. There's a mother and father of the House, which is an old British tradition that speaks to the individual who has been there longest. We now have a mother of the House in Barbados for the first time. There are parliamentary committees like the Privileges Committee, and the Public Accounts Committee, of course, is one that you all were speaking about earlier. None of these committees really work very effectively or very independently because they're all dependent on who government puts on them. While in the United Kingdom, the arrangement is a slightly different one where the committees function better because you have large numbers of people, many of whom are no longer members of, well, no longer members of government, and they can make these committees work in the way that they should. So my thing is, if we're going to talk about reform, we have to look at all of these roles and see if we can reform them in a way that takes into consideration the non-active politicians, broaden the pool. You know, I remember years ago when we were talking about, I felt there were too many MPs in Barbados. I felt that a smaller number could work. And Dr. Bell was making a point at the time that maybe there were too few. And the idea is that you have as many as you can afford. There are a lot of things that I disagreed with Dr. Bell on, but this is one I've come around to, I believe, in time. That if we have a larger pool, especially if we can draw more heavily on the Senate, it gives us the opportunity to do a number of these things, drawing on individuals who are not actively part of Parliament. So we have had incidents in the past where matters are referred to this committee, Privileges Committee. I have never seen a report of the Privileges Committee, and I don't believe it was in a position to report on anything. You had a situation recently where the Speaker was referred to the Privileges Committee. I mean, it's the most absurd notion of having a Speaker who controls Parliament being referred to a Committee of Privileges that is controlled by the persons who control Parliament anyhow, and expect it to come to a conclusion other than that, you know, nothing was wrong in the first place. I think that we need to look at all of these things and ask ourselves whether we can still take comfort in the fact that we're using these Westminster institutions that were designed for 600 plus people in a way that you have a small number to start with, and then all of them are guided by the whip, the parliamentary whip in many instances. There's an issue of people who are independent senators and the idea whether they can represent civil society, and I know that the suggestions on the table about getting more people involved by having a wider pool. So Sir Richard suggested the idea of adding an LGBT representative and adding a disabled representative and telling the Constitution to identify all of these. I am frankly not comfortable with that arrangement because it relies on the president to then determine who is the LGBT representative, who is the disabled representative, and indeed if there's a disabled representative at all. Currently, there's supposed to be a representative from Labour, but there is none because the president, Her Excellency, has obviously determined that Labour is well enough representative in Parliament already anyhow, so you can give the opportunity for something else. But my sense is that we have created a situation in which there is a discretion on the part of the president to determine what interests ought to be there and how those interests are represented. And I think the best example of that is how we look over the years at the religious groups. You know, the Constitution speaks to religious groups being represented in the Senate. And the person has either been Anglican or Methodist. I think we once had a Methodist, which I was happy about because at those days I was a Methodist. I've moved on a bit from then. It was a while ago. But generally it's an Anglican. I've never seen a Rastafarian representing religious interests in Parliament. I've never seen a Muslim representing religious interests in Parliament. Indeed, I've never even seen a Muslim in Parliament, period. Okay? Certainly, I've never seen, Baha'i, you know, there as well. A Hindu, I've never seen any of those. And my sense is that the idea of writing into the Constitution that we should have these interests represented creates problems where we may or may not have the right person. And I think the better approach is the idea of having the assumption that if you want to be a representative, you run for a seat. So if you represent the private sector and you want to get into Parliament, you either attach yourself to a political party or you run as an independent and you try to get into Parliament. And if you have that at-large option, it gives you the option, if you are a half-decent private sector person, maybe you will get a seat at the table. But this idea that we can articulate every single space and get people in there in that way is something that I have some challenges understanding how that would work. But it is very popular to talk about broadening civil society and so on. We have some implications for the Senate as a reviewing body. My understanding is that the original idea is that the Senate, derived from the House of Lords, it should be a reviewing body. The reality is that the Senate is now not really in a position to review anything. because a lot of the senators are junior to the members of parliament, and they're not really in a position to give, conversation in those regards. So my question is, does the Senate really need to see half the things that go to the Senate? Because if you are not in a position to review it or to add anything significant, then why is it going there in the first place? And I do feel that there are opportunities for us to look at the role of the Senate, to reserve it for example, matters where it is relevant, like constitutional matters, or alternatively, to ignite important conversations based on the fact that it has a slightly broader membership on issues like the same ganja or things that other things that might come from public initiatives. And that's something I'm hoping that we can think about. The role of the political party is the elephant in the room. Owen Arthur did an interesting thing many years ago with the, and I know that the clerk will correct me if I'm wrong, the Administration of Parliament Act is what allows Parliament to give political parties money, right? I like that idea because I think it essentially speaks to the important reality that the political party does work that is important to Parliament's existence. I think that we should build on that. I mean, it's obvious that we have more than one political party, and I think both should get money. Hopefully, in due course, if the Democratic Labour Party decides that they're willing to come on board, or the Constitution is changed or whatever, then once they get into Parliament, there will be that opportunity. But I feel that in addition to just the idea of getting additional funds, there ought to be other support that Parliament could give to political parties at the institutional level to support the work. Currently, as I understand it, the money is given on the basis of a statement that it was spent, right? That to me is not necessarily an abuse of the financial arrangement, but I think that it is something that could be tightened. And we have missed an opportunity where maybe Parliament can give the political parties guidance in relation to accounting and to build structures in relation to that. And that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping that that will be able to happen if Parliament gets more involved in the work of the political parties, because it's absolutely important to the existence of Parliament. I also think that just trying to rush through, because I realize that we're supposed to be having a conversation, so we need to give an opportunity for that. The work that members of Parliament do is limited in many ways. When you ask members of Parliament what it is that they do on a daily basis, and Liz is a member of Parliament, there are others present, they will tell you that a lot of their day-to-day work is dealt with responding to issues that people have. So I have an issue in terms of the house fire, house spot. The school children need clothes and shoes to go to school because the end of the term is coming up. You would normally have a big party in August because everybody will need things for school. And we had an MP who got a little carried away once and gave away flat screen televisions at that party. But not necessarily suggesting that we should go in that direction. But I'm basically saying that, parliamentarians go to Parliament and they make speeches and the debate and whatnot. But the actual work that they do in the constituency, which people need, is not supported in Parliament in the ways that they always should. It's bad enough when you are a member of Parliament and you are a minister. But when you're not a minister, it becomes even worse. You've made a significant step in that direction by not only having constituency assistants, but now having liaison officers. And as controversial as it has been, I think it's a brilliant idea. Because anything that you can do to help parliamentarians do the work that they do. And the reality is going to funerals and that type of thing is a lot of the work that parliamentarians do. So why should it not be supported by Parliament? My idea is that we need to add to that. We need to add to that by way of enhancing the financial grants to parliamentarians that would allow them to manage small projects in the context of a constituency that would require not only finance, but a staff to account and to manage projects and so on. We have a good example of Jamaica, where the constituencies have evolved to the point now where most of the MPs now have like a project management staff, and they can manage small projects at the level of the constituency, and I think this is a brilliant idea, allowing MPs to do the work that the vast majority of people want them to do. and not just being in ministries and then having to rely on their own resources to do a lot of the legwork at the level of the constituency. So I'm hoping that Parliament can look at that, that the reform can look at that and create those kinds of facilities that would allow create the kinds of facilities that would allow them to be able to do this work. The other aspect of the presentation speaks to privileges of current and ex-MPs. In terms of current MPs, I think that the concerns regarding the current MPs and the privileges and benefits are relatively few. I spoke about the issue of them having staff at the level of the constituency. I don't believe that the current arrangement that sees a parliamentarian as a well-paid public servant, at the highest level, which is the way that Sir Lloyd always told us in school, that a parliamentarian is the highest level of public servant. So as a result, their salaries should be tied to what public servants are done. I feel that we have gone beyond that, and I think that there ought to be a mechanism that independently reviews and determines, on the basis of some kind of a committee system, what parliamentarians should be paid and what increases should be given. And actually, while we're at it, we may very well need to start looking at similar advice being given to other sections of the public service, but that's a matter for a different place. So maybe an independent committee or commission of some sort that is responsible for setting the terms and conditions of Parliament is something that could be thought about. And that, to me, is one of the individual benefits that I think need to be looked at. But my greater concern is with respect to ex-members of Parliament. I am not sure what benefit a person gets after they have ceased to be a member of Parliament. I think that you're allowed to park in the parliamentary courtyard for the rest of your life, if there's space. And you're recognized, precisely, because if they don't recognize you, you still can't park there. I think that we can do better than that. If you were a minister, some time ago, a gentleman who was a minister said that if you were a minister, you get to keep your diplomatic passport. I think that that's a good thing. But I also believe that there ought to be other benefits that you can receive. What I do hope is that this committee can make clear recommendations to articulate these things and not just be at a whim and fancy of someone saying, we think this ought to be done or we think that ought to be done. But I think it needs to be clearly stated that there are certain privileges and benefits that a person will retain after they cease to be a member of Parliament. As far as the Prime Minister is concerned, and I think that this is something that requires urgent attention, this too is left to the whims and fancies of individuals who are in or out of office. Mercifully, Sir Lloyd was treated very well up to his final days, but I do not think it should have been up to Prime Minister Motley to be kind to Sir Lloyd. I think that we need to have some kind of an institutional structure that says that a person who serves as Prime Minister, once that person ceases to be serving as Prime Minister, they can have certain benefits that are enshrined. I believe a person, once they become Prime Minister, should carry the title for the rest of their life and should be referred to as Prime Minister, regardless of whether that person is in office or out. And I know that that's Americanism, but I think it is the least that we can do because it is a benefit that you can give to the person even if that individual is no longer in office. I think a former Prime Minister needs to have a small staff, certainly somebody that provides security, secretarial support, or in the case of someone like Sir Lloyd, nursing support. And not just because a Prime Minister thinks it's a good thing to do, but because it's something that is a relatively standard. There ought to be official transportation given to a former Prime Minister. And I think that there also ought to be a situation, I mean, it's not particularly helpful now in the sense that we only have one former Prime Minister. But were we in a situation where we had 2 or 3, it would be useful if they could continue to play some kind of a role in the standing committee system of Parliament or something of that nature to ensure that you continue to benefit from that person's participation in perpetuity. To me, these things are small and they're not expensive, but I think it's the least that we can do to ensure that once persons go into Parliament and certainly become Prime Minister, that they come out being benefited in that way. And the final point I wanted to make is I wanted to support Dr. Bell's proposal about the enhanced committee system. I've been really happy watching the conversation in Parliament taking place in terms of the estimates. And I do hope that we can bring a similar perspective to other matters where you have a redesigned area in some area of Parliament that allows interested members of the public to go and participate more fully in conversations that are going on based on the standing committee system. I thought Dr. Bella was an excellent idea, and it's the kind of thing I hope will be part of the future of this group. So gentlemen and ladies, again, thank you for your participation, for inviting me. This is like Dr. Bella, this is the first post-COVID face-to-face that I've been having. I'm disappointed that the Clerk of Parliament advises there are no refreshments. But that's something to think about next time that you have it. But thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Peter. Over the next 2 months, I'm sure that these questions and other questions like them are going to be formulated by you and presented to the Commission. We have taken some time in hearing the presentations, but we believe that there must be some burning issues that we would still want, you might still want to put on the table for us. Remember that we are finding what you want, so we're not going to be able to give answers to any specific questions on the future, but we would like to hear any thoughts that are pressing on your mind, and so I open the floor for any such comments.
Good evening, sir and gentlemen. My name is Edwin O'Neill. It is fashionable now to talk about disrupting and reconstructing. And I want to suggest that Parliament, the Barbadian Parliament, is now ripe for some deconstructing. I'm prepared to write more fully on what I say now, because I recognize that in this environment, time is a constraint. If we are going to make Parliament more relevant to today's times, I submit there must be a facility for a recall of elected representatives. The mechanics as to how we implement a recall system is not difficult to work out. In the global village, where we are now bombarded by political systems from all over the world, I think we also got to look at what is to be the role of the Senate. Is it going to continue to be a mirror of the House of Lords? Or is it going to move more towards the American system of a super representative being elected? I think we also got to look at the role of, as to whether ministers ought to be located in the Houses of Parliament, or if you, again, borrow from the American system, where members are elected to represent local constituents, and cabinet is drawn from outside of Parliament, but is accountable to Parliament. And we keep having this hybrid borrowing and lending and borrowing from other systems. I am struck by the talk about the Westminster model. And it seems as though Barbadians don't recognize that part of the success of the Westminster model is because there is invariably a large backbench that can keep the cabinet in control. We have a complete opposite in the Barbadian system, where cabinet now outnumbers the backbench. Who then will control cabinet? Who then is cabinet responsible to? In fact, some literatures describe our situation as the dictatorship of the cabinet. I have yet another peeve. And again, as you hear submissions, I would wish that you direct your attention in reforming Parliament to what is the role of labor in civil society. I read the Constitution, and I see several interests are recognized or qualify for a position in the Senate. So for the first time in 50 years, there's no labor representative in the Senate. And I submit that modern democracy in Barbados began with the labor movement. And it amounts to a semblance of ingratitude that a parliament, a Senate continues without a representative of labor in the Senate. Whatever is the role of the Senate in Barbados, whether it is a review body or not, who will speak for labor in the Senate? And I like the suggestion by my comrade Peter about anybody who feels strongly enough needs to hitch a wagon to a party for election in the lower house. But if the Senate is to have the prestige and the distinction that currently exists in this country, and there is no representative of labor in that august chamber, then I submit that the prestige is significantly and severely diminished. I recognize from all the looks around that there are others that are chomping at the bit. So I will pause now and hope I'll get the opportunity to write more fully on my submissions and suggestions about reforming the parliamentary system in Barbados. I'm much obliged. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Starting next Thursday and for 2 months every Thursday, we are going to have presentations like yours. And if you would be so good as to either put that in writing or otherwise make the presentation more developed, we would be very happy. And for others of you, please, we are very anxious to hear ideas like these, and they would be of tremendous assistance to us. Yes, my brother.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Buddy Laria. Say that unlike I am a fortunate person.
She's working to
I repeat, my name is Buddy Laria, and I'm just like George Bell, Dr. George Bell and Peter Wickham. This is one of my first times since COVID of speaking to the audience such as this. And this is what I have to say. I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but I did not go to a secondary school, whether foundation or otherwise. But what I have to say, and I think I am, I ran as a Parliament independent candidate on 3 occasions: 1994, 2018, and 2022, and did not vote for myself. So I had no intention to becoming a parliamentarian. But I went and paid my deposit to inform Barbadians that the voting system is corrupt. And this is why it's corrupt. In 1991, I came from England to Barbados on holidays, and there was a general election, and I took the opportunity to vote in Barbados for the first time because I went to England in 1963. And I did not pay attention to who was the candidate for the DLP or the NDP. Because in England, I came from a position where we, as black people in England, we did not pay attention to the person running for office, unless it's in local election where we are in. But general elections, we didn't pay attention. We know we was going to vote for Labour because we didn't like the Conservative. As a result of that, when I went to vote and walk into the polling station, I didn't see BLP or DLP or NDP, so I did not know who to vote for. In England, there's 3 references on the paper: the candidate, the party they represent, and their address. The principle of that was your standing, so I need to know your name. Your vote, you're standing for a party, I need to know the name of that party. And your address. If you know my address and representing me, why is it that I don't know your address? Simple. That was our principle in England. So if you got the Westminster system and you don't have these principles, something is wrong. And as a result of that, I took interest in complaining to the Electoral Boundaries Commission and to the 3 political parties, because only the person's name and their profession is on the ballot paper. And the thing about it is, and I make this point, I'm going to put all that I'm saying in writing to you, so I'm not going to be long. Barbadians, as African people, as Excellency Bobby Marsh said, we are sick. This is the 530th anniversary of the economic and spiritual war that we have been fighting. 530 years. And all that Bobby Morse have said, the Prime Minister on 2 occasions gave us a hint. On the 26th of July, on the day of remembrance, this is what she said to the world. She pointed to the Parliament of Barbados. She said, in 1661, the then Parliament of Barbados passed a law. It's called the Barbados Slave Code of 1661. That basically said that black people were not full human beings. She repeated it again to the people of the world, not just Barbados, on the 3rd of August at the Sir Lloyd Sandiford Center consultation. 3 leaders, three leaders, 3 principles, 1 conversation. And this is what she said. Again, in 1661, the Barbados Parliament passed a law to say that we, black people, were not full human beings. And it was the 13 colonies of America that became the United States of America that picked it up and basically said that black people were only 3/5 human beings. And as a result of that, all the countries in the world treated us as less than human beings. I end with this. What I would like you to do, because it's personal to me now, classism and racism in Barbados is as if it did not stop from slavery, emancipation. That's why there's a new revolution in the emancipation program. I was treated with disdain, they call it, where I was victimized in Barbados between 1998 and 2001, being paid as a messenger while doing the work as a project officer, because there was no one in Barbados that as skillful as I am. And this is why I end with this.
My brother, I think you've gone a little personal now.
Oh.
And if you want to, we might be able to have you make a presentation either this coming Thursday or any further one. But we are going to be able to hear your discussion. And if you have that as a problem as a worker, the Barbados Workers Union is still taking members. Are there any other?
No, but my
but
chair, but I said, I am retired. I'm 80 years old. I am not looking for a job.
Oh, well, all right, that's all right.
I'm trying to give Barbados the benefit of my experience.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. But the personal part, yes, there may be questions of a personal nature, but if they relate to the issues that we have and anybody wants to challenge, comment, or otherwise assist us, we would be very happy to hear from you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Lalu Hanneman. Protocol having been established, I will just go straight into this. I heard a number of panelists expressing their support for the first past the post system. And in fact, Dr. Bell was saying that without the first past the post system, we could end up with some nutter becoming prime minister. I would like to just remind Dr. Bell that both England and America, in effect, have first-past-the-post systems, and we can get more nutters than Donald Trump and Boris Johnson.
I agree.
Right? And it was the first-past-the-post system that put them there. Donald Trump got 2.5 million less votes than Hillary Clinton, despite all the foolishness he says currently. And yet he is, or was, the president of America. Under proportional representation system, that would not be the case. Margaret Thatcher, milk snatcher as she was known as, she only got 43% of the cast vote, and she always got a 100-seat majority. Right here in Barbados, we have a situation, and I'm not representing any political party in Barbados, I'm just being objective. The DLP got a quarter of the votes in both of the last elections. Logically, and if it was a democracy, they should get a quarter of the seats. They should have had 8 seats, 7 or 8 seats in both parliaments, this parliament and the preceding parliament. But the first-past-the-post system has given us, in effect, with all due respect to the present government, an elected dictatorship. You know, it cannot be said to be democratic to have a situation where all the seats are just in one party's hands, and a quarter of the electorate are deprived of the right of representation. So I would urge the panel to seriously consider an alternative to first-past-the-post. There are alternatives, and there's one called a single transferable vote, there's one called alternative vote system. There are a number of other methods other than just blatant PR list systems. Or alternatively, one of the chambers can have a PR system and the other chamber can have the first-past-the-post system, which would still give the constituency representation. By way of ending, I would just like to say, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, you know, the end we seek is pre-existent in the means we use. And I think, unfortunately, the head table as it stands is leaving out half of the people of Barbados. There's no female representation. And you know, it's important, if we're talking about democracy, that democracy is practiced at all levels. So it's essential that the panel is composed of at least 2 women, I would have said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Is there another comment?
Hi, good night. My name is Pierre Cook Jr. Sorry.
Yeah, good, yes.
Is that good?
That's beautiful.
Perfect. My name is Pierre Cook Jr. First, I do want to say thank you for the presentations tonight. As a young person in Barbados, it's rich to have this type of discussion and be a part of this process, even at this time. So many of the presenters or panelists tonight respectfully spoke to the matter of youth and how youth could be included or be a part of the system. And I wanted to come tonight to say that within this conversation about parliamentary reform, and even the conversation around constitutional reform, I think it's important for there to be dedicated space for young persons to be a part of the process or to be integrated in the system. One area I think where there's room for growth or room for this engagement is through our Barbados National Youth Parliament. It's been an organization that's been active for the last, I'd say, 10 or so years. And we have produced, I think, brilliant members. I'm one of the past members of the Youth Parliament. And there was a time when we were situated and under the guidance and governance of Parliament. And I think that is something that would be useful as well for us to go back to so that we have a dedicated group of young persons who are interested in the parliamentary system, interested in getting involved in Senate, interested in getting involved in elected governance, but who may not necessarily want to be aligned to a political party. That was a great space for that type of development, training, understanding, and if it is that we're committed to building a mature political system, and if it is that we want to continue to see mature persons within our representative governance, I think it's important that in looking at the reform of our current parliamentary structure, that we try to think of where we can find dedicated space for young persons. Now, I did listen to Mr. Wickham mentioning, the difficulties that might come with saying, well, we need a youth representative, and we just need to find one to fill this spot. But I'm wondering if there's scope for a young person to be involved, whether it is in Senate, in a dedicated way as part of that represented group, which is currently included in the Constitution, which must, or rather should be represented on the appointment by the president. So again, just for some type of dedicated engagement or involvement of young persons within this process. Yeah.
There's somebody else coming to the mic, but as that person comes, can I just suggest to you that if you and your group would wish, and you put some thoughts together, just write to the Clerk of Parliament on this subject, and we would be very happy to hear you make a presentation. It sounds as though you have some thoughts that the Commission could benefit from hearing. Yes, sir.
Good night. I'm a Christian. I good government. I don't see nothing wrong with it.
Good, we can hear you now.
I don't see.
No, go ahead.
You said nothing wrong with your mama.
Good night. I'm a Christian. I go to the Emmanuel Baptist Church on President Kennedy Drive. And I was born in 1954. I was to go to America to further my studies when I was about 19 years old. I went to school at Bear Prairie Boys School, and I had all the papers to go to America. I had missing a job letter, and I didn't get a job letter. I ended up in Barbados, and I was voting from 1973. From 1973. I stopped here and worked at the Bridgetown Port. I was a carpenter. I learned woodwork at Harrison College. After that, I went into Bridgetown Port and worked from 1973 to 1991. In 1991, I asked to get rehired, and I didn't get rehired. I stopped. I went and built houses with NCC. I work in urban, and now I retire. I'm 69 years old.
Yeah, so, but you're not working anymore, right?
I would like to work.
Well, yeah, well, you were telling us that you are 69 years old, and you are at the meeting with us. Is there something else you want to tell us? That's all right then. I'll talk to you afterwards, okay?
No, I just talked to Mr. Lane, Corey Lane. I come from Bridgetown.
Okay.
From
At the end of the meeting, we will then have a little chat. Okay, last calls. Yes. Yes, sir. Oh, you got to bring down the mic this time.
Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Menezes. I'm visiting from America. A lot of ideas that I've heard, and I would like to share a few things. First of all, I was born in the British colony of India. I have very mixed lineage. I was raised in the former British colony of America. And one thing that in the last 5 or 10 years, as I have traveled globally and throughout the United States, one thing I have noticed is this perception of what's going on currently in American politics. And I would like to say, as a man of color, coming from America, a minority, a Muslim, that I think is a very valid thing to consider when having this discussion, to the point the brother made, is we should begin to think in terms of building blocks for the future as a person of color, like I said, in America. And I would like to, being Marcus Garvey's birthday today, I would like to make mention of him. This is a West Indian man who was born in Jamaica, who for whatever reason saw it feasible, plausible, and necessary to organize black people in America, which, what does that mean? That means he left the West Indies to go and gain experience and to also serve a population of the black diaspora globally, and it bore much fruit. Why do I say that? To this day, we haven't seen a movement in America, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. We have not seen a single organization of black people rival that organization in number, or I would argue even in effect. Malcolm X is somebody who spoke at Oxford University, and he debated in Oxford University the concept of whether it is okay to take up arms, in a sense, or to resist a system that has been archaically and unjust, and to take a brand new look at the situation. I think as people, brown and black people globally, we suffer too much to use the constructs of European colonialism and the methodologies used to further our betterment. And I just wanted to share those thoughts, because I think oftentimes the global world looks to black America in a derogatory way. But in contrast, I would urge every person who is oppressed in the world to look at the movement, the organization of brothers like Malcolm X, like Marcus Garvey, who both Harlem, where the renaissance of black people in America happened culturally, politically, musically. And this is where two of these people made their home in organizing people. They didn't use the system or run for office. They used the street corner. When I was 20 years old, I went to Washington, D.C. in 1995, and I was a part of something where 1 million black men stood on the footsteps of the Capitol to make a statement, to make a stand. This was organized by Louis Farrakhan. Louis Farrakhan has never run for government. He's never ran for office. But in many ways, even if we don't agree with him 100%, he speaks to the voice of black America to this day. So the only reason I came to speak is to challenge everybody here, and myself first, to think about bettering our situation, bettering our plight in terms of using something so revolutionary, well, I've heard that term, but so basic and elementary at the same time, is to recognize our self-worth, to recognize our acumen, to recognize our ability to lean upon each other, and to at times come up with stuff on our own, if that makes sense. But it must be trust, there must be love. Thank you for listening. One love.
Thank you very much indeed. Remember again, next Thursday, we will be at the Foundation School. And if you would wish to make a presentation, and you have it in writing, or you just want to make the clerk aware of it, the Clerk of Parliament, he is as Secretary to this Commission. We will make note of this, and we will get started. Some of you will get the opportunity to present more fully than you did today. We will take a final speaker, and then I shall ask one of the Commission members to thank you for being here. So, ma'am, you are...
Okay. Good evening to the panel and to everybody.
Good.
First of all, thanks for a very enlightening presentation. I've learned a lot thus far. My name is Ms. Renette Demont, and I ran in the last general election under the Democratic Labour Party. And my question really is to Peter Wickham. And you talk about the Administration of Parliament Act and how that allows Parliament to give money to political parties, but we all know that the Democratic Labour Party did not win a single seat. Now, to run in an election is expensive, to run a political party is expensive, and to continue to do so in the public eye. And I want to know tonight, what do you propose in terms of facilitating a political party even when they have not won a single seat in Parliament?
Let me say that I don't have an answer tonight. The Commission doesn't have an answer tonight to any of your questions, even though it might be important just as this one. We are in a reception mode tonight. So forgive me if I'm not able to answer that. Okay? We have a question, I think, online.
Okay, thank you very much.
But you
This
wanted-
question really was to Peter Wickham
But you
to
understand
shed some light on that area.
Respond to that.
Okay, can you?
No, I can answer quickly. I think is that
Okay,
I didn't
appreciate
think it was
it.
appropriate because I thought it was essentially we were speaking to the commission, so I didn't think it would be
Right.
appropriate for me to have a back and forth.
Oh,
But
okay.
but I think I said in my conversation that I had some challenges with that as well.
Right,
And I
okay.
think that once a facility is created where parties running can be part of either the lower or upper house, then there's an
Right.
opportunity to deal with that effectively using the same Administration of Parliament Act. Because it can be changed. The rules can be changed very easily.
Absolutely.
And my sense is that a big part of the DLP's problem is the fact that you're not in Parliament, and a big part of the
Right.
reason you're not in Parliament in the upper house is through your own decision not to be there. You
Right.
appreciate that. So I'm saying if you were in the Senate, for example,
Well, say that from which perspective?
yeah, because you were offered a Senate seat.
Oh, okay.
So now I'm saying that once there's a facility where persons running can either get into the lower house by winning or the upper house through the facility that I was talking about, the McLean proposal, for example, it would
Right.
give the opportunity for proportional representation in the Senate, and then the opportunity is there to say to persons, look, let's change the Administration of Parliament Act to reflect the fact that you have a minority representation, and and you can get money based on that. So.
Right.
But I said that in the comment, right?
But I'm speaking from the perspective of what I've observed so far.
Let's talk after, because
Oh,
this is
okay,
their
okay.
forum, not ours. So
All right, okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
No.
Yeah, in a minute we will have a vote of thanks by one of the commission members, Maxine McLean. But before I do so, I just want to recognize that our presentation was carried on various parts of multimedia, and we would want to thank all of those people who participated in whatever form that they did in the exercise. Thank you very much. And bear in mind that we are going to be at this again Thursday of next week, that is Thursday the 24th. Foundation School, we hope that we will see more of you there. And if you have presentations and you want to put something in writing, you don't have to write it out fully, but some notes to guide you, and let that help you to make sure you get across some of your views, including the candidate who wants to make a presentation. You can put that in writing, and you may get other people supporting you. But we are ready to hear you. Now, our sister Maxine McLean, I am offering her the floor, and she will just let you see that we do have females on the commission, if you didn't see them. And here's one.
No, you stay there. Thank you very much, Ladies stand. Let me say thank you very much, Chair Sir Roy Trotman, Sir Richard Cheltenham, Chairman of the Parliamentary Reform Commission, and other members of the Commission, distinguished presenters, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, who have graced us with your physical presence. And I'm happy to say that we were joined by over 300 persons online, and we look forward to their continued participation. In participating in that way, you've not only joined us live, but you've also created an opportunity. Well, certainly the streaming has created an opportunity for us to be able to capture all that has transpired this evening. I want to thank all persons who made this educational session a success. Sir Richard, your initial comments would have contextualized the work of the Commission, and I will borrow from Mr. Wickham's term. He said that we had a philosophical and historical overview. That you didn't put it quite like that, but those two words were yours for sure. But the philosophical and historical overview trace the evolution of our parliamentary system. Let me shut this. That would have traced our evolutionary, the evolution of our parliamentary system. And our third speaker, Mr. Wickham, would have given us some practical suggestions as to areas to focus on in terms of any effort to examine the parliamentary process for the purpose of reform. I want also to thank the company. I just remembered and I forgot again. Oversight. I was going to say omnipresent, but that wasn't it. Oversight. Well, that may be a good name. Oversight. And particularly Ms. Lyons for signing for us. I think it's important that we be as inclusive as possible. And of course, to the members of the audience, I'm not going to detain you by trying to capture the essential elements, but I also want very much to thank the chairman of the proceedings this evening, Sir Roy, and to the members, the executive and members of the Barbados Workers' Union for providing the facilities for this evening's session, as well as facilitating us by assisting with the logistical arrangement. To my colleague members of the Commission, I think that your presence here and your continued support of the effort, and I can tell you that it's a hard-working committee, and I will not single out anyone, but I think it's a good mix of age and youth and experience. But I think we have taken on the challenge, and we believe that this evening's session will add very much to our ability to undertake the mandate that we've been given. So again, thanks to the persons who have agreed to attend, both physically and virtually, and to all who have made this a success. And I look forward to sharing with you and others as you contribute to what is expected to be a very important task that we've taken on as a commission. Thank you very much, and travel safely to your respective homes.
Thank you. Thank you.